All right. Welcome to another episode of the AI SDR movement. Today, I'm joined by Maura Rivera, our CMO. And today, we're going to talk a little bit more about onboarding and hiring an AI SDR. So in previous episodes, we've talked about inbound versus outbound SDRs. We've talked about MQLs. Do they matter anymore? We've talked about the AI imperative. So if any of these episodes have piqued people's interest and they're like, you know what, I might like to bring on an AI SDR, but they're unsure what that process looks like or how to do it, that's what we're going to dig in today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Sarah. I was like, it's fun to be on the flip side of this and not be the interviewer. So I'm excited to dive in.
Perfect. So I think to set the stage and context set a little bit before we talk about hiring an AI inbound SDR, first, let's talk about a day in the life of a human inbound SDR. What are they thinking about on a day-to-day basis? What are they focusing on? What are their tasks? What is the organization expecting of them every single day? So let's start there. Tell me about a day in the life of an inbound SDR.
Yeah, I mean, inbound SDRs as marketers, we rely so heavily on them. I think it's a super undervalued role. They're the gatekeepers of pipeline for an organization. As an inbound SDR, they're responsible for engaging and converting qualified leads, marketing qualified leads, and getting them into the pipeline. So let's look at our SDR team. Every day, the marketing team is handing them new inbound leads. So they could be from events. We just were at a bunch of events the other week. It could be from our website through different forums that we have. It could be from third-party sites where we're capturing leads. And we basically are handing them these leads. And oftentimes they're inbound leads. They're hand raisers who are saying, we want to learn more. We want to get in touch. And they're working those leads. The first thing is they want to understand who's qualified and how quickly can I engage with those folks and get a meeting on the books for my account executive so that they can move on to the next. So it can be pretty monotonous to be that SDR role because you're trying to engage and qualify and convert as many inbound leads as humanly possible and then kind of move on to the next. And at Qualified, when we were thinking about the SDR role in this larger pipe gen landscape, we felt like this role is ripe for an AI worker. It's ripe for automation. So much of it is monotonous tasks. So much of it is copywriting as well and good messaging to these folks to get them on the hook. And it just felt like an awesome opportunity to really plug in an AI worker and an AI SDR. And one thing to think about, and we've talked about this in other episodes, is you can take off a lot of the heavy lifting of what these human SDRs are doing, and you can outsource that to an AI SDR, have them work on the team as well so that your human SDRs can focus on higher quality activities. Maybe it's prospecting and outbounding. Maybe it's working people who are further down the funnel. And so when you think about bringing on an AI SDR, the way we've talked about it, which it sounds kind of cheesy, is like, what would you expect of your human SDR? What are all of the things that they're responsible for in a day? And how do you make sure your AI SDR can accomplish all of those things and do the full kind of job scope that a human would do on your team? Because you want to have high expectations for them, or else it's all going to kind of fall apart.
Absolutely. Now, before we start talking about onboarding and hiring an AI SDR, I actually want to go a little bit deeper on human SDRs, especially how you interact with them in your day-to-day as a CMO. So you kind of talked about like you have a huge lead queue. We just went to a bunch of events last week and we came back with thousands of lead lists. I love our inbound SDR team here. They're fantastic. Many of them have been here for years and they're really good at their job, but sometimes there's more leads than they can handle. So what are your thoughts as a CMO? Are you concerned on a day-to-day basis? Like, are leads getting missed? Like, tell me about your thoughts as a CMO on like your concerns or like worries when your human SDR team is working the leads that you're bringing them as a marketer.
Yeah, I mean, I think every CMO or marketing leader like yourself stays up at night worrying about that. We're doing all of these activities from brand awareness to billboards to digital advertising to events. We're doing all of this work to bring these leads to our sales team. But what happens between when they are captured and when they're converted? And to your point, oftentimes the bottleneck is human capacity. So we have some weeks where it's pretty even, right? We generate the amount of leads we expect to generate. It's pretty even keeled. But then we have other weeks where it's super chunky, like our events week that we had last week. And we came back on Monday and like the first thing I slacked our head of events on Monday is like our SDRs all over these leads. We have all these hot leads. We just had all these conversations at the booth. They attended our sessions. Like, how are we working them? Have they all been worked? Have they all been touched? Like, you have to strike while the iron's hot. Craig, our CEO, he's talked about the 5-minute rule. Like, if you don't engage within 5 minutes, you're 20 times less likely to get into a deal. And so as a CMO, no matter how hardworking your SDRs are, because our SDRs are the best in the business. They come to our team meetings. They feel like an extension of our marketing team. They're all over it. They only have so many hours in a day to engage and convert those leads. And so that's scary to me. Like, our leads, falling off the table, is pipeline falling off the table. How do I make sure that as a CMO, I feel confident that the activities we're doing are converting at the clip they could be? And that's kind of scary. You're dependent on human bandwidth from that SDR role.
Yeah, and I think I want to echo what you said about it's usually a bandwidth problem. It's not a capability problem. Like, we've trained our SDRs, they're really good at their jobs. But to be able to send really good messaging, like, I go to our events. I was at some of our events, last week or the week before, and the team on the field does a really good job of taking notes of like, hey, I had this conversation at the booth. This person's really interested in XYZ. Now, if I'm the human SDR that's receiving 1,000 leads at a time from booth conversations, if I'm spending the appropriate amount of time with each of those leads and writing a really personalized message and really doing my job well, I just have a bandwidth capacity. I have a limitation on my time to get through all of these leads, and then you struggle with like prioritizing them. And then by the time you've gotten through your whole lead queue, it's been days, weeks, sometimes.
Yeah,
and suddenly that person, like, I know I barely remember was the event last week or the week before. So if you've messaged me at this point and said, hey, you stopped by our booth, I probably don't remember that I stopped by your booth. So I think, as we now shift to talk about bringing on an AI SDR, this is why I'm so excited about the concept of inbound AI SDRs, is not to replace my human SDRs. It's to help them in times like this when we see that like chunky lead volume, or suddenly we have an influx of leads. Is I need it to be timely but good conversations, messages happening from my team. And I think an inbound AI SDR can assist them with that and take the load off of them.
And I think like that's the promise we've all bought into, which is how can we scale our inbound pipe gen motion? How can we like interact with all of those leads at once with hyper-personalized experiences and make sure that we're really intelligent with that lead follow-up or engagement? And I think what we're going to talk about today is like the devil's in the details. Like, people have bought into the vision of an AI SDR, an inbound AI SDR, but you need to make sure that they can do the work. You need to make sure that they can stand up alongside your human SDRs and be just as good, have just as high quality of interactions, have just as good data hygiene. Like, they need to be able to stand alongside that team and make that team better and not pull them down. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, which is like, if you're going to bring in AI SDR onto your team, how should you think about it? What do you need to make sure they can do in order for it to really like be a force multiplier to your business and not a detractor?
Absolutely. So if that's piqued your interest, if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, I maybe want to bring on an AI inbound SDR, let's start at the very beginning. So if you were going to bring on an AI SDR, what would be the first thing that you need to think about to make sure that, like you said, they're multiplying your team and they're not detracting from your team?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We've been building Piper, our inbound AI SDR, for a while now. And when we first started building her, we thought about her just like our best SDRs. And we're like, what's the first thing you do when an SDR starts at your company? You put them through boot camp. You onboard them. It's really interesting because folks who are in the SDR role, sometimes they're more junior in their career, but they're the front lines of your organization. They're the first impression somebody has of your brand oftentimes. You need to make sure they're on message. They understand how to talk about your solution. They can field sometimes complicated questions about pricing or integrations or product capabilities. And you need to make sure they understand like your business and what it's all about. So first things first, just like you would with a human SDR, you need to be able to onboard your AI SDR with all of your marketing materials, your FAQs, your snippets. You also might tell them what you don't want them to talk about, things to stay away from. And that's critical for this AI SDR. And I would say part B of that is once you've onboarded them with all of your marketing materials and your messaging, you need to make sure they have goals. So if we brought a new SDR on today, we would put them through boot camp and then we'd say, okay, here's your 30, 60, 90-day plan. Here's your quota. Here's what we expect you to do from an activity perspective and from a pipe gen perspective. And you have to hold your AI SDR accountable to the same metrics. So goals, like part one of that is what are they trying to achieve and generate from a pipe gen perspective, but also goals of how to treat different types of inbound leads that they're working with. So if you have someone who's real top of the funnel, just try and get them engaged with the brand. If you have somebody who's bottom of the funnel and has raised their hand to talk with your team, let's make sure you get a meeting on the book. So you're kind of architecting them the same way you would bring on a new SDR. And something that's interesting, Sarah, which you lead, is like we do our pipeline council every Friday. And Piper, our inbound SDR, our AI SDR, she's on the leaderboard. Like we're holding her accountable the same way we are human SDRs. And I think you have to have that mindset when you're bringing an AI SDR onto the team.
Absolutely. And I'm so excited that we started with the onboarding in particular, because I think it's something that often gets overlooked. Like, I think you can get excited about the promise of AI and you can jump immediately to the output and you can see all these cool things that these AI SDRs can do and the volume in which they can send messages and how many leads they can work. And that's really exciting. But if you're considering bringing on an AI SDR, I just want to caution, dig into the onboarding portion, ask questions around what does this look like? What material can I give to this AI to make sure that it is on brand and on message, it's saying the right things, it's referencing the right things, and then also then that it has the goals it needs to take the appropriate action. And if that does sound a little bit more complicated, there's a reason why. And I think if it seems like a simple onboarding process and it's as simple as a couple prompts and you upload or it scans your website one time and it's done and bingo, bango, all of a sudden it's off and going, sometimes that simplicity is a negative because you're going to get simple outputs. So if you're looking at onboarding an AI SDR, I think you hit the nail on the head with like the onboarding process should mirror a sales boot camp. And you should be able to use the same materials that you would use in a boot camp with human SDRs because you needed to reference the exact same information and make sure it is always using the right things and saying the right things. So I just cannot overemphasize enough the importance of that like onboarding step.
Yeah, and I would say at the beginning, like when we first turned our AI SDR Piper on our site, it was, almost a year ago now, but I was nervous. I feel like such a steward of our brand. I have very high expectations for like our messaging. Every touch point with our brand needs to be pristine. It needs to really emulate who we are and be on message. And we have these great human SDRs who've been trained to do so. And I remember the first few days she was live on our site, I was watching her answers and I turned over to you and I was like, she's doing a good job. And do you know what else? She's really fast because she doesn't have to go look through our knowledge documents to get answers or scour through our website or send a Slack to our team to ask how we should answer it. She does it within milliseconds. So that's been really cool to see, just like the level of quality that proper onboarding can deliver when it kind of comes to fruition with an AI SDR.
Totally. And it's such a small use case that I tell to people all the time when I'm like out in the field at events and talking about just AI SDRs and Piper in particular is the ability to reference materials and send those hyperlinks is so hard for a human SDR to do. And even our best ones, our marketing team is churning out content at a crazy rate. It's impossible for a human. It's even impossible for myself to remember like what exists and like what's in our repository of content. So as part of that onboarding process, like, yes, we would give a human SDR all of those resources and tell them where it is, but it's so easy in the moment when you have to be fast and you have to be precise to remember what those resources are. And I think to your point, one of the things that stood out for me in those initial days of onboarding was I too was like on the website watching like a hawk and making sure there was nothing said that was incorrect or we weren't giving a bad experience to a potential prospect because I care about pipeline. I didn't want to leave pipeline on the table is the ability to send those hyperlinks and those resources like instantaneously. Sometimes to the point where I'm like, I didn't even remember that we had that resource, but that this AI SDR, because it has access to all of your systems and you did the work onboarding her, that she can now find those in milliseconds is incredible.
It's impressive.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about onboarding. You've got your AI inbound SDR onboarded. You've given them goals. What's next? What's next for a normal human SDR and what they would have to do in their day-to-day that an AI SDR should be able to emulate?
Yeah, I mean, I love tying it back to what you would do for a human because you would get them onboarded, they would go through boot camp, they would graduate, they would get certified, whatever it may be, and then they'd be on the router and they would have their lead queue. They would be in Salesforce looking at inbound leads that are coming their way and quickly trying to decipher who is a real quality lead and who should I work right now to try and hand them off to my account executive. And the same goes for an AI SDR. So things that are paramount kind of when we talk about the job scope is you need to be able to make sure that your AI SDR can see all of your leads that are coming inbound, obviously. They can see all of the correlated account data for that lead so they can have a clear picture of this person. And they can see all of the information from all of your go-to-market systems. So really, it's paramount that they have like a 360-degree view, super clear picture of all of the leads that are coming inbound and can surface data about who they are so they can start to segment them and qualify them and understand which leads are really ready for me to work right now and who kind of falls to the bottom of the list. And so having that insight into not just Salesforce, but all of your go-to-market systems, it's paramount. And having an all-in-one, like really clear view so they know exactly who that person is, the account they work for, any website activity from the past. That's important. That's kind of what they feed off of. That's what sends them to work.
Absolutely. And it's so funny having you talk about these. And I think the reason we wanted to do this episode is there are multiple steps to onboarding and hiring an AI SDR. And all of them work together simultaneously. Because you just talked about, like, you get a lead queue, you have your router, you're giving these leads to these SDRs, but it's their job then to try to identify like who they are and then where do they fall in priority. And then I'm like, well, you can't do that without goals. Like if you haven't set the goals and you haven't given them those like lanes that they need to stay in and say like, hey, if they meet these criteria or they say these things, this is the action that you want to take.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have everything working together simultaneously. Mm-hmm. So without the goals, being able to then understand who these leads are and like having all that information is kind of for nothing if they can't then act on those goals.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Okay, so we now know who these leads are. We have our goals set. Now it's time to drive pipeline. Like, obviously, that's what I'm helping my SDRs with every single day is like, where's the pipeline? Where are the numbers? Yes. So what is the first step, do you think, for an SDR and an AI SDR to start driving meetings and pipeline?
Yeah, we've talked about like their knowledge, their brains, like what's in their heads. But now it's like, okay, how does that AI SDR go to work? The first thing they obviously need to do is they need to be able to send email, and not just like transactional email, but really timely, contextual, intelligent email based on all of that data we talked about earlier. So that's where they plug in everything that's in their brain and they really apply it to how they're communicating with inbound leads. So common use cases, obviously, for following up with inbound leads, these could be people who fill out high intent forms, contact us, demo requests, trial signups, whatever it may be. These could be leads who come in through your events. These could be leads that download content. You need to make sure that your AI SDR can immediately, and do this at scale, follow up with and nurture those folks via email and do everything to drive them back to the site.
Absolutely. And I think as we talk about email in particular, I have to imagine, given how crazy my inbox is, that yours is also pretty wild.
Insane.
So if you think about email and how hard it is to break through, like, yes, this is kind of table stakes. Like, they've got to be able to follow up. They have to be able to send these emails. It's nice being an inbound rep and also an inbound AI SDR, because typically you're following up with hand raisers. So there's already like a level of interest there that helps you like break through that noise of the inbox, because usually you have hand raisers that are coming in. But beyond just the email, it's typically not enough to just send a follow-up. We've talked about the 5-minute rule, like how timely you're following up. There's so many factors that impact, even if someone raises their hand, getting that meeting on the book and actually like making sure that that hand raiser is turned into pipeline. So beyond email, what does an AI SDR need to do to ensure that that meeting is like in fact booked and it's generating pipeline for your team?
Yeah, and I would say before I go into that, like you raised a great point, which is speed to lead. Like that's what an AI SDR is enabling. We've talked about the 5-minute rule. You're 20 times more likely to get them into a sales cycle if you can respond immediately. If you don't, they're going to your competitor's website. So let's say you harness all of that data, you know, about an inbound lead, you send them that immediate email response, thanks for signing up, we know which account you work for, like I'd love to get a meeting on the books. That's not enough, because then what happens if they just send out email? What happens when they reply? What happens when they come to the site? So this is where we talk about the importance of an AI SDR who can work across multiple channels. So when somebody does click through, that AI SDR can greet them with a personalized message via chat. And of course, within that chat, they can answer questions using all that onboarding. They can surface relevant offers based on everything you're putting into market. They can invite folks to schedule a meeting with the right sales rep. So we call this kind of the 1-2 punch, which is like they send the email, they arrive on the site, they can serve up those really real-time personalized experiences based on all of the data they know about someone. And that's the dream, right? Like, with human SDRs, they'd go into a queue and it could take hours or days to follow up, and then they click through or they don't respond to the email or there's a bunch of email back and forth. You've lost that opportunity. You have lost them. Like, it is no longer relevant. But if an AI SDR can do that timely follow-up and then that real-time conversion on the site, like that's the dream. That's the magic moment. And I'm super excited about Piper, our AI SDR, who can do both, because she can leverage all of that intelligence and convert them instantly on the site.
Absolutely. There's two things that you talked about there that I want to dig into a little bit more. And the first is you talked about relevant offers. So I think, as marketers or people who work on a pretty consistent day-to-day with SDRs, we're pretty used to like the email, the chat component of it. Like this has become pretty commonplace. But I mentioned earlier how hard it is for reps to understand what content exists from a marketing perspective. And we can talk till our faces are blue about sales and marketing alignment. It's hard, and it's hard for a lot of reasons.
Yep.
Marketing works incredibly hard to generate good content, relevant events that they need to drive registration for. I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about the ability for an AI SDR to focus on offers and the impact that can make for you as a CMO who has all this content and these events that you're trying to drive to. That's typically not a focus for a human SDR.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about offers, it's all those things you said. It could be events, it could be content, it could be like free trials or white papers or new reports. And I think something that's so important with offers is that it's not like a one-size-fits-all thing. An AI SDR needs to know what segment that visitor is in, where they are in their buyer journey, and they have access to all of the offers that your marketing team's producing, and they can serve them up in a really contextual way. So they can surface them up across different touch points on the site, within a chat, within a conversation happening in the messenger, and say like, hey, Sarah, I know you clicked through, but maybe you're not quite ready to schedule that meeting. And you're like, oh, I want to know what other customers in my industry are seeing success with your platform. The AI SDR can say, check out this case study on our site. I think you'd love to peruse it. I think you could learn a lot from it. And that will just continue to move you down the funnel. And then when the time is right, if you're like, okay, that you gave me the confidence, AI SDR, I loved learning that, then you can book a meeting. But it helps just kind of nurture them along their journey. And the AI SDR has so much knowledge about everything you're putting into market and that visitor that it just serves up this really bespoke kind of buying experience and brings them down the funnel.
Absolutely. I feel like you've mentioned this before, and it's really stuck with me. It's talking about this AI inbound SDR feels like it's working for marketing. Now, whether your human SDRs report into marketing or report into sales, like they've got a quota, they've got to feed hungry AEs. It is really cool when you talk about offers is like, it does feel like they're working for marketing. Like they are really helping you achieve the goals that you from marketing also have to hit beyond just like booking meetings and hitting pipeline numbers. So I think that is really incredible. The second thing I wanted to dig into a little bit more about what you mentioned is you kind of talked about this holistic experience and that it's really cool to have this AI SDR that can do both email sending, but then have conversations when they're on the website. And why I like this conversation so much is we used to have what we called the 1-2 punch. We still have it. Like it's still a huge part of our business. And when I would be out in the field at events and I'd be talking to people, I get asked all the time, like, what's your number one pipeline lever? Like, what's the thing that drives the most pipeline for your organization? And I would talk to them about the 1-2 punch. And there is this like magical moment of like, I sent you a really good email. And our outbound SDRs or our BDRs, they spend a ton of time writing really good personalized emails. Now, when they that prospect clicks through to the website, what we would call the 2 of that 1-2 punch is we would then have really personalized conversations with them because we had all the data that we needed from our CRM and our ABM systems and exactly what email they clicked on. And we're surfacing that in what we call live view so they can see all of those things. So when we started talking about an AI SDR and what they needed to be able to do, I was like, I can't lose that pipeline lever of the 1-2 punch because it creates such a magical moment that just is so much easier to book meetings. So how important is it to you that they can have that like holistic experience?
It's paramount. And I think the thing is everybody wins with this experience. Like the buyer's winning because they click through an email and the AI SDR knows they click through and they can convert them in like an instant way. So it's like a great buying experience. The company wins because they no longer have all these like disjointed communication experiences with these prospects. And ultimately, the company really wins because they get pipeline instantly. So it's like a win-win-win. We call it the Piper 1-2 punch. She sends an email, she greets them, they convert, and it all is happening at massive scale and instantly with all of the leads coming into her queue. So it's pretty magical. And it's once you experience it, you're like, why wouldn't I want it? Why would I have any other way to convert a buyer?
Absolutely. And now to wrap things up, we've talked about like booking meetings, which is obviously the most important thing that we want. That was like the number one goal an AI inbound SDR had to be able to do. But what is the last step of their process? Like beyond booking meetings, there's still like one more thing they have to do that, let's be honest, most human SDRs don't love to do.
Yes, I feel like we've struck a nerve with you. But So booking meetings, absolutely. And like, it's not just booking a meeting with anybody, it's leveraging all of that onboarding data, all of that lead and account data, and booking meetings with the right people on their team so it works and complements your systems. But the last step is really data hygiene and workflows. So it's once you've engaged that person, the AI SDRs converted that person, how do you make sure you're flowing all of that data back into your source of truth? So for us, we think about workflows pushing data into your CRM. How do we make sure that opportunity is created? We have all of the notes on that conversion experience. We know what source that opportunity, et cetera. And then how do we make sure we're pushing all of the data where it needs to go? I know this is a pain point for any marketing team, which is like, is all of the lead data up to date? Have we updated everything in Salesforce? You need to make sure an AI SDR is not working in a silo. Because if they're just working on their own and just sending out emails, or if they're working on their own and they're just chatting, but that information's not flowing back into your source of truth for your revenue operations or marketing operations function, what's the point? You need to make sure that it works with your systems of record and is like crazy maniacal about their data hygiene and pushing everything where it needs to go.
Absolutely. And going back to like, again, this holistic AI SDR that can work from start to finish, from like onboarding to meeting booking through to like data hygiene, which is really hard for most humans to do. The one thing you talked about there is like booking with the right person. And you talk about silos, and I think that's such an important thing to touch on a little bit more, which is like, there's nothing worse from a user experience than like getting a really good email from a rep, clicking through to the website, maybe talking to someone completely different, which is like, okay, that's fine. It's not usually that big of a deal. And a lot of times like we'll have human SDRs jump in and say like, hey, I saw you click through like Ryan's email. Thank you so much. Like, what questions do you have? But it creates such a negative user experience if it's then booked with the wrong rep. And that, I feel like early days of Qualified, we would get questions about this all the time because that was kind of like some sentiment in the market, is they would be like, well, like people come in, they have conversations, but it's booking with the wrong AE. And then it like makes for a really terrible user experience because they're getting like bounced around to a bunch of different people. So I just want to talk a little bit more about like the ability to access all that CRM data and being able to do that handoff and like a holistic rep being able to like do that from start to finish. Have you noticed an improvement there? Like, are we booking with the right people? And how important is that for like making sure an AI SDR, when you're hiring them, can like always book with the right person?
I mean, I think it's paramount, because if you can't route correctly, hand off correctly, et cetera, you're going to lose the trust of your account executives and your whole organization. So you need to make sure that they're plugged into your business systems, to your operations, just like any human SDR would. And not only does that routing matter for meeting booking, but it also allows the AI SDR to maybe hand off to a rep for a live conversation or a real-time meeting right on the site as well. But if you don't have that all orchestrated, everything will crumble.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's it as far as like hiring an AI SDR. I feel like we covered the whole gamut of like onboarding them, being able to send emails, providing that holistic experience with like conversations and offers on the website, and then bookending it with like, you got to have good data hygiene and workflows. So thank you so much for taking us through that. Hopefully people are feeling a little bit more confident in that process of what it would mean to bring on an AI inbound SDR.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think my last piece of advice would be, if you're bringing on an AI SDR, bring them on with the same bar that you would have for a human SDR. What do you need them to do? What do you need them to be able to accomplish? What does success look like in this role? How are they going to complement your whole go-to-market motion and not hurt it? And how do you kind of keep that same standard for the AI workers that you're bringing on, and look at that job scope, that resume essentially of the AI SDR you're bringing on? So it's an exciting time, and it was fun to talk with you about it.